There are stories that begin in the noise of the world, and others that begin in silence, in that invisible space where the mind meets the mystery of creation. Johnny Carson, the king of late-night television, seemed to live entirely in the noise. Laughter, applause, flashing cameras. Yet behind that glittering stage, there was something few people ever saw. A quiet fascination with the ancient Jewish idea that words, when shaped with purpose, could create reality itself. It wasn't show business that truly made Johnny Carson rich. It was understanding how the unseen world responds to the seen one. What he discovered, consciously or not, mirrors a principle found in Kabbalah. That every outcome in life is first born in the inner world, in intention, in discipline, in silence, long before it appears in the outer one. As a boy in Nebraska, Carson wasn't the type you'd expect to rule television. He was shy, curious, a loner who loved magic tricks more than baseball. While others sought the spotlight, he sought control. Not of people, but of perception. He learned how to make an audience feel what he wanted them to feel. And somewhere in that desire to command laughter, to orchestrate emotion, was the seed of a mystical truth. To speak is to shape reality. Kabbalists have a word for this. Koch hadibur, the power of speech. The world, according to Jewish mysticism, was created through speech. And God said, "Let there be light." Words don't just describe, they make. Every syllable, every pause, carries creative energy. Johnny Carson, without robes or candles, used that same energy every night. Commanding attention, crafting mood, summoning worlds with a single sentence. But there was another, deeper secret that he embodied. One not found in entertainment, but in the structure of the soul. Kabbalah teaches that wealth is not merely material. It is the harmony between giving and receiving. Those who master this balance are the true rich. Carson's genius was not only in earning millions, but in understanding the rhythm of giving laughter and receiving affection, of offering wit and receiving trust. This balance, ancient sages would say, opens the channels of blessing. And yet, like many who hold a great light, Carson also battled shadows. He struggled with loneliness, perfectionism, and the hidden fear that if he ever stopped performing, he might stop existing. It's a paradox that the Kabbalists knew well. The more light one carries, the stronger the darkness that follows. What matters is whether one lets the darkness teach humility or destroy purpose. This story is not about television or fame. It is about the subtle alchemy between the spiritual and the practical. How one man, unknowingly guided by timeless Jewish wisdom, transformed his life through the mastery of inner forces. In the chapters ahead, we'll uncover how Johnny Carson's journey mirrors the mystical principles of Kabbalah, how he used silence as power, how he turned discipline into abundance, how he spoke worlds into being, and how at the height of his success, he learned that wealth without inner peace is just another form of poverty. Behind the laughter lies a sacred truth. The same principles that shaped Carson's success can shape ours, if we learn to see, to speak, and to give as the ancient masters taught. Let us step behind the curtain now to the quiet place where the showman met the soul, and where the wisdom of Kabbalah whispered its richest secret. The power to create reality lies in the heart, that knows when to give and when to receive. Before Johnny Carson ever became the voice of American nights, he learned to listen, not to applause, but to silence. As a boy, he would sit alone for hours in his small Nebraska home, practicing card tricks in front of a mirror. Every flick of the wrist, every pause before revealing the card, carried something sacred. He was not just learning entertainment, he was studying timing, the spiritual art of holding stillness before releasing creation. In Kabbalah, silence is not emptiness, it is potential. The sages call it ayin, the nothingness from which all existence emerges. It is the breath before speech, the thought before action. When God said, "Let there be light," there was first silence, an infinite pause filled with possibility. Johnny, without knowing it, practiced the same law. His entire career would be built upon that pause, that split second of quiet before a punchline, that held breath before the crowd erupted in laughter. Every great performance he gave was a reflection of a cosmic rhythm. contraction and expansion, silence and sound, concealment and revelation. This is what the Kabbalists call Zimtzum, the divine act of self-restraint that makes creation possible. God withdrew to make space for the world. Likewise, Carson withdrew himself, his nerves, his ego, his fear, to make space for the moment. He knew instinctively that if he filled the air too quickly, there would be no room for magic. There's a famous night when Carson opened The Tonight Show with nothing but a long, deliberate pause. No music, no words, just Johnny staring at the audience, eyes full of mischief. The silence grew unbearable until he finally smiled and said, "That's how long it took NBC to decide if I was funny." The crowd exploded. What they didn't realize was that this moment contained the essence of Kabbalistic creation. Out of nothing came everything. In life, we rush to fill silence. We mistake stillness for weakness, pauses for failure. But the mystics knew otherwise. They taught that every person who learns to hold silence gains mastery over chaos. Wealth, success, love, all are born from this same sacred rhythm. The discipline to wait until the right word, the right action, the right gesture emerges naturally. Johnny's power wasn't in what he said, it was in when he said it. The world rewarded him for timing, but heaven rewarded him for restraint. That is why the sages say, in a place where words are many, sin is not absent. To know when not to speak is higher than all speech. Many years later, when Carson retired, he was asked what he missed most. He said, "The pause. That beautiful pause when you know the joke has landed, but you don't know yet how the room will respond." In that sentence lived the echo of eternity. The pause between cause and effect, between prayer and answer, between light concealed and light revealed. If we learn anything from Johnny's hidden stage, it is this. Before creation, there must be stillness. Before abundance, discipline. Before laughter, the breath that prepares the soul to give. This is the first secret of Kabbalah that Johnny embodied, whether he knew it or not, and the one we too must reclaim in our noisy, restless world. Because silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything that has not yet been said. To the casual viewer, Johnny Carson's success seemed effortless. A charming host, a clever joke, a crowd that loved him. But beneath that smooth delivery was something far older than comedy. It was the Kabbalistic art of dibur, the sacred discipline of speech. The Kabbalists teach that the world itself was spoken into existence. When God said, "Let there be light," that phrase didn't describe light, it made it. Words, therefore, are not labels. They are forces. They shape the unseen. Johnny, consciously or not, treated his words with that same reverence. He knew that every word carried weight, and that the right tone could turn an ordinary sentence into revelation. He spent hours crafting his monologues, rewriting, listening to how syllables landed on the ear. He believed rhythm mattered more than content, because rhythm was energy, and energy was truth. In the Torah, the first letter of creation is Bet, open on one side and closed on the other, symbolizing that the universe moves forward, never backward. Carson's monologues had that same flow. Always forward, always alive, never stagnant. When Johnny stood before the camera, he entered a state that the mystics would call devakut, a focused union with purpose. He wasn't merely speaking to millions. He was channeling the creative flow through humor. Every laugh he evoked was a spark of light released into the world. The Kabbalists would say he was sweetening the judgments, turning heaviness into joy, fear into laughter, despair into relief. That is the power of speech when used not to wound, but to heal. But the same tool that builds worlds can destroy them. Carson knew this as well. Off stage, he was careful with his words, often quiet, even withdrawn. When a friend once mocked another comedian in front of him, Johnny simply said, "If you throw words like knives, don't be surprised when you get cut." That line carried the echo of Proverbs. Life and death are in the power of the tongue. The audience saw only his sparkle, but his friends saw his reverence for silence between words, those tiny spaces where intention lives. Kabbalah calls those spaces nefesh dibur, the soul of speech. They are what make a phrase alive. That's why Carson never shouted or forced laughter. He let his words breathe, giving them time to find their mark. In our world today, words are cheap. We post, argue, gossip, react, forgetting that every word is an act of creation. If we could see the energy our words release, we'd speak with far more care. The mystics say that angels are formed from our words. Johnny's angels then were laughter and relief, the kind that lifted people after long days. His wealth, too, was a reflection of this mastery. The Zohar teaches that when speech aligns with truth and generosity, abundance flows naturally. Johnny didn't chase wealth, he attracted it, because his speech generated joy, and joy is a vessel for blessing. Yet there was danger in it too. Kabbalah warns that those who wield the power of speech without humility eventually burn from their own fire. As Carson aged, his humor grew sharper, his trust thinner. He once admitted, "The audience laughs with you for years, until one night you realize they're laughing at you." That awareness haunted him. It is the Kabbalistic law of reflection. Whatever energy one sends out will return, magnified. Still, Carson's mastery of speech remains a lesson for all who seek both success and integrity. Words can sell, seduce, entertain. But only when spoken with awareness do they create. To speak consciously is to participate in divine creation. To speak carelessly is to feed chaos. So before you speak today, to your child, your partner, your co-worker, remember Carson's stage. Remember that every sentence builds or breaks a world. And remember that even laughter, when born from empathy, is a form of prayer. Because in the end, Johnny Carson's true wealth wasn't in his contracts or his fame. It was in the invisible currency of words, the light he created with each one. Every flame that burns must have a wick to contain it. Without the wick, the light consumes itself. That truth, known to mystics for centuries, is the hidden foundation of wealth, joy, and mastery. The Kabbalists call this law gevurah, discipline, restraint, boundaries that give shape to light. Johnny Carson, perhaps without ever studying a page of the Zohar, lived this principle as faithfully as any sage. His entire career was a study in controlled radiance. How to shine brightly without burning out. How to give laughter without losing oneself to the applause. People saw him as a man of charm and ease, but those who worked beside him saw something else, a precision almost sacred. Every gesture, every pause, every smile was rehearsed not to impress, but to preserve balance. Carson understood that chaos begins when emotion outruns order. The audience could feel that invisible order in him. It gave them safety. When he walked on stage, the room settled, as though his inner discipline extended outward and calmed the collective pulse. That too is Kabbalah, the inner world shaping the outer one. In mystical language, light represents blessing, creativity, wealth, love, inspiration. But blessing can only dwell in a vessel strong enough to hold it. The sages say, "A cup overflowing wastes the wine." Johnny's life was the slow building of a cup. Long before the fame, he spent lonely nights mastering his craft, rewriting jokes, timing breath and tone until they aligned perfectly. He never allowed himself to rely on charm alone. The discipline behind his spontaneity was invisible, but it was what made him great. There's a story his staff often told. During rehearsals, Carson would walk silently across the stage, studying the set, the lighting, the rhythm of the room. Someone once asked, "Why do you do that? You've been here for 20 years. He replied, "The room changes. If I don't listen, I'll miss the shift." That single line contained a world of wisdom. In Kabbalistic thought, light is never static. It flows, expands, and contracts. The disciplined soul listens for those shifts and adjusts. Discipline in this sense is not rigidity. It is attentiveness. It is listening so deeply that one becomes a partner with creation. The Kabbalists describe God's act of creation as tzimtzum, the contraction of infinite light to make space for existence. Carson practiced a human version of this every night. He withdrew ego, impatience, fear, making space for the audience to exist. His humor did not dominate, it included. He didn't speak at people, he spoke with them. In that humility, his power grew. But the test of light always comes when success arrives. The Torah warns that abundance without gratitude leads to spiritual famine. Carson's fame exploded, and with it came temptation, flattery, indulgence, excess. He could have drowned in it, as many entertainers do. Yet he remained curiously detached. He refused to party late, avoided Hollywood politics, and lived quietly in Malibu, fishing, reading, thinking. His colleagues called it aloofness. Mystics would call it shmirat haor, guarding the light. Guarding the light means understanding that not every stage deserves your presence, not every invitation deserves your yes. The modern world glorifies exposure. Be everywhere, speak always, stay visible. But the ancient wisdom of Kabbalah whispers the opposite: hide to preserve, conceal to strengthen. The moon rules the tides not by shining constantly, but by waxing and waning. Johnny, in his quiet way, followed that lunar rhythm. He gave light and then withdrew, letting the vessel refill. This rhythm of giving and withdrawing is what sustains abundance. The mystics say that true wealth flows through a circuit: receive with humility, give with generosity, rest with faith. Carson embodied all three. He received fame with gratitude, gave laughter with generosity, and rested in silence with faith that his light would remain. His restraint was not fear, it was trust in divine balance. Still, even masters of restraint face their shadows. Carson wrestled with loneliness, the cost of protecting his vessel too fiercely. In Kabbalah, too much gevura can freeze the flow of light. Balance requires chesed, kindness, openness, love. One night after a show, an assistant found him sitting alone watching the empty seats. She asked if he was all right. He smiled faintly and said, "It's strange. I make millions laugh, and yet this silence feels louder than applause." That was his tikkun, his correction, the place where light and darkness met. He learned, slowly, to open again. He began mentoring young comedians, giving them opportunities on his show. He treated their failures with compassion, never humiliation. Once, when a nervous performer forgot his lines, Carson filled the gap with gentle humor, saying, "Don't worry, I forget mine every night." The audience laughed, the young man recovered, and a career was saved. That was Kabbalah in motion, transforming judgment into mercy, darkness into light. Through those acts, Carson expanded his vessel. The more kindness he gave, the more abundance returned. The Zohar teaches that when light passes through a vessel of love, it multiplies rather than diminishes. Carson's ratings soared, his wealth multiplied, and his influence deepened. Not because he chased success, but because he channeled it. The flow of divine energy follows the same rule as rivers. It rushes toward the open heart. If we strip away the showbiz glamour, what remains is a timeless formula. Restraint builds the vessel. Kindness fills it. Balance sustains it. Without one, the others collapse. A life of pure discipline becomes cold. A life of pure generosity burns out. The secret lies in weaving them together. That is why the Hebrew word for wealth, osha, shares its root with ashrei, happiness. True wealth is not having everything. It is being aligned with the flow that creates everything. Johnny Carson's legacy was not a collection of jokes, but an invisible pattern of energy. He showed millions that joy could be crafted through discipline, that laughter could be sacred, and that self-control could open the gates of abundance. His wealth was the outer reflection of an inner law, the law that energy obeys order, and order born of humility becomes magnet for blessing. Today, in an age addicted to exposure and noise, his life speaks more loudly than ever. We too are performers on a vast stage, surrounded by distraction, seduced by instant light. The challenge is not to shine constantly, but to shine wisely, to know when to speak and when to be silent, when to give and when to retreat, when to open and when to guard the light. Johnny's story teaches that every act of restraint is a form of faith. Every boundary is an act of devotion to the source that gives light, and every moment we choose order over chaos, we become, in a small way, co-creators with the divine. So take a lesson from the quietest man in show business. Build your vessel, protect your energy, and give your light where it matters most. The universe rewards those who respect the rhythm of creation, and if you're enjoying this reflection, subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. Your attention, like light, expands what it touches. Because in the end, the richest people are not those who hold the most, but those who have learned how to hold light without letting it burn them. In Kabbalah, wealth is not a static treasure, it is a mirror. Whatever you give to it, it gives back magnified. Johnny Carson, who became one of the most successful entertainers of the 20th century, learned this lesson through years of joy and sorrow. The more laughter he gave, the more fortune came his way. But when he closed his heart, even with all his riches, he felt empty. The law was clear. The world reflects the state of the vessel. The mystics teach that the universe is a living feedback system. Every thought, every act, every word returns to its source in amplified form. That's why the Kabbalists say, the measure you use will be measured to you. It isn't just moral advice, it's spiritual physics. Carson, though not a religious man, intuited this law through experience. When he gave laughter with generosity, blessings flowed easily. But when he withdrew in cynicism, the flow slowed, and he felt its absence deeply. There's a story from the 1970s, at the height of his fame. A fellow host had lost his job and came to Carson for advice. Johnny listened silently, then handed the man an envelope without a word. Inside was a check large enough to save his home. "You don't owe me," Johnny said. "Just make sure the next person doesn't fall." That act remained secret for decades, yet those who knew him said his career soared right after. To the mystic eye, that was no coincidence. It was reciprocity, the mirror returning light to its source. Kabbalah divides giving into two forms, giving to elevate and giving to control. One feeds the soul, the other feeds the ego. Carson wrestled with that balance. There were nights when his generosity was pure, offering the spotlight to a young comedian or comforting a nervous guest. But there were also moments when he gave to maintain his image, and each time he felt an inner hollowness afterward. "You can't fake kindness," he once said. "People feel it, even through a camera." The mystics would agree. They teach that the divine system responds not to what you do, but to why you do it. The heart is the true currency. The Zohar even says that when a person gives without sincerity, the act still creates energy. But it returns empty, like light reflected from a dull mirror. Only genuine intention turns generosity into abundance. Johnny learned that lesson slowly. In his final years on television, he became more selective about his jokes. He avoided cruelty, even gentle mockery, because he'd begun to see how words shaped reality. His laughter evolved from cleverness to compassion. Audiences felt the change. It was softer, wiser. Ratings climbed again, even as his style grew quieter. That shift was spiritual maturity. He had learned that joy offered without love is entertainment, but joy born of empathy is transformation. One of his closest friends recalled asking him late in life, "After all this success, what have you learned about money?" Carson smiled. "Money is a mirror," he said. "It shows you what you really are. If you're generous, it multiplies generosity. If you're fearful, it multiplies fear." That statement could have come straight from the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. The outer world reflects the inner one. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. This mirror law explains why so many wealthy people feel poor. They chase accumulation instead of reflection. They hold tightly instead of flowing. Kabbalah insists that wealth is not a possession, but a channel. It must move. The tighter you hold it, the more it slips through your fingers. Johnny understood this instinctively. He gave anonymously, avoided ostentation, and kept his circle small. He once said, "The moment you show off, the blessing hides." That's a mystical truth. Divine energy resists arrogance, but the mirror does not only reflect generosity, it also reveals the self. In his private life, Carson struggled with relationships. His perfectionism made him hard to love, and his need for control, his gevura, sometimes blocked chesed. Yet even his heartbreaks served as lessons. In Kabbalah, brokenness is not failure, it's preparation. A vessel must crack to expand. Through those cracks, new light enters. His later humility, his patience with younger performers, his quiet support of charity, all grew from the pain of his earlier years. The sages would say that Johnny's life was a tikkun, a repair. Each act of generosity balanced an earlier act of pride. Each moment of listening balanced years of speaking. This is the mirror's deepest secret. Reflection is not punishment, it is opportunity. The universe repeats lessons until we learn them. So what can we learn from the mirror of wealth? That giving and receiving are not opposites. They are two halves of the same breath. To give is to exhale, to receive is to inhale. You cannot live doing only one. Carson's greatness was his eventual understanding that both are holy. The more he gave, the more he could receive. The more he received with gratitude, the more he was moved to give. That is the Kabbalistic circuit of abundance. When you live as a channel rather than a container, wealth, spiritual or material, cannot help but flow through you. When Johnny Carson ended The Tonight Show in 1992, more than 20 million people watched his farewell. The world saw a composed man, gentle and grateful, saying goodbye with grace. But beneath that calm was something deeper, the quiet realization that every light, no matter how bright, must one day return to its source. To the mystics, that moment was not an ending, but a return to balance. The law of Kabbalah fulfilled. The sages teach that all light comes from the infinite, and to remain infinite, it must circulate. To cling to it is to lose it. Johnny, after 30 years of nightly creation, laughter and applause, understood that truth intuitively. The applause was no longer a source of life, it had become an echo. To keep giving, he needed to become silent again, and so he stepped away. In his last monologue, he spoke softly. I bid you a very heartfelt good night. Simple words, but charged with enormous energy. The mystics would say that those words contained Shavira, the holy breaking, the moment when a vessel, having fulfilled its purpose, releases its light back into the world. That is why people cried watching him. They weren't mourning a show, they were witnessing a sacred return. For years afterward, Carson refused public appearances. Reporters speculated, was he reclusive, bitter, afraid? But those who understood the rhythm of spiritual life recognized another pattern, withdrawal after revelation. The Baal Shem Tov compared it to the moon after the full phase. Once it shines its brightest, it must fade to renew. Johnny wasn't hiding, he was recharging his light. He spent his later years walking on the beach, reading philosophy, speaking little. He once told a friend, I lived half my life making people talk. Now I'm learning to listen. That simple statement carried the wisdom of the ages. The man who had conquered noise was learning to master silence once again. In the final years before his death, Carson was asked in a rare interview whether he missed fame. He smiled faintly and said, I miss the work, not the noise. That distinction is profoundly Kabbalistic. The mystics teach that the purpose of creation is not noise, not even success, but refinement. The transformation of coarse light into pure awareness. Johnny had finally reached that stage, and yet, behind the stillness, there was something luminous. Friends said his humor remained sharp, but softer, as if each joke was a whisper of the divine play. When he laughed, it wasn't to command attention, but to join the flow of life. In Kabbalistic terms, he had transcended the polarity of giving and receiving. He had become one with the rhythm. We often imagine enlightenment as a flash of light or a mountaintop revelation. But for Johnny Carson, it was found in the simple act of letting go. His wealth, his fame, his audience, all the lights of his life had been gifts. And by releasing them, he completed the circuit of creation. That's the final law of abundance. To give up control is to become infinite. The mystics tell a parable about a lamp that feared the dark. If I go out, it said, the room will be lost. But when the flame finally dimmed, it discovered a deeper light behind the shadows, the light that never ends. Johnny's final years were lived in that light. He no longer needed applause to know his worth. His life had already echoed across generations. His vessel had done its work. And so, his story closes where it began, in silence. The same silence that once hid a shy boy practicing magic tricks in Nebraska now held an old man who understood the greater trick, that the secret of life is not to hold light, but to become it. His journey through fame and solitude, laughter and loss, discipline and compassion, reveals the essence of Kabbalistic wisdom. Everything that expands must also contract. Everything received must eventually be returned. That is how the universe breathes. And perhaps that is why, even decades after his passing, Johnny Carson's presence still lingers. Because his light, refined through discipline and kindness, did not vanish. It circulated. It lives wherever a voice speaks with awareness, wherever laughter heals instead of wounds, wherever silence becomes creation's first note. If this message made sense to you, subscribe to the channel, leave your comment, and share your opinion. Because the true secret of Johnny Carson, and of Kabbalah itself, is this: wealth, laughter, and peace are not found in the applause of the world, but in the heart that knows when to speak, when to give, and when to let go. What does letting go mean to you today?